What is up? This is the Nook Podcast. My name is Steven, and it is a great honor to have you listening today. If you ever have questions or comments about this show, I would love to hear from you. Seriously, drop me a line. The address is steven@nookpodcast.com. That address is always in the show notes, along with a link to the Nook Facebook page and to Buy Me a Coffee, which is a simple and secure way to support this show. Every little bit helps. Continuing on this month with the makers, my people, artists and creators in tangible and at times the intangible ways, obscure ways, behind the curtain. And that's where we will go today. I get to introduce you to my friend, Brittany Durphey. She is a live event producer. And if you have no idea what that means, I hope you learned something today. We will discuss a bit about what she does, but more importantly, how she does it. The world of live production, live events, do not typically have a lot of people who are Christ followers. And that's why I love that Brittany is there, being a light in an otherwise dark realm. The hours are long, the travel will wear you down, and every job can be your last if things don't go well. Brittany will be the first to tell you that she is still learning how to handle all of this with grace. And that's just one reason why I think you will really enjoy this conversation with Brittany Durphey. I kind of know what you do. And that's just from a familiarity that we do share a lot of background or even foreground on the type of stuff that we both worked on. But for the sake of introducing who Brittany Durphey is and what Brittany Durphey does, let's go about it this way. You just met somebody at a gathering and they say, well, what do you do for a living? How do you even start into that?
Yeah. Thank you for allowing me into this space of yours.
Certainly.
First off, I'm so grateful to just be able to be a servant to you as well. But if I were to describe myself, this is a very challenging question because I think I'm still trying to identify what this is. But as far as what I do, I like to say, be a little elusive. I'm a storyteller. I'm a creator. I'm a servant as well. So that's kind of like the top ground of what I do. But to a little bit more in detail, I'm a producer. So I produce things on a live event production scale of things, which is what we share in common. And so grateful for the opportunity to kind of get a chance to talk all the techie stuff together.
Sure. And how long have you been doing that?
Ooh, show my age, why don't you? I'm kidding.
Oh, please.
I have been, so this is the thing that you probably don't know this about me, but I've only been doing like the live production side of things for like 3 years, and it gets fuzzy when I think about COVID, but I want to say 3 or 4 years. And before that, I was really kind of doing what I call on the other side of the dark curtain or the black curtain, as many of us know. And I did, event management. I did, obviously serving other people and doing all of the front of house things when it comes to managing events.
Okay. All right. Well, you just threw a buzz term out there that people might not be familiar with. Front of house. That's a glossary thing. What is front of house?
Front of house. It is, how do I like to look at it? I like to look at it as like, obviously our world is, I would say, very hospitable and, just serving people. I'm going to keep saying that because that's how I look at my position. But when I think of front of house, I think it's anything that your guest experiences front hand. So it might be crazy in your back kitchen, right? You're trying to get Thanksgiving together, but you don't let your guest experience that. All they can see is the nice chinaware. They can see the plates and the music. All of that's so lively. And so that's how I think of when I think of front of house.
Yeah. And to me, it's funny because front of house, typically when you talk about in production world, is the back of the room, but it's still front of house. And that's where the audio board is and the lighting board and lots of people dressed like ninjas.
Yes.
Well, you've moved to the more behind the scenes thing as a producer. You work for companies. Who hires Brittany to do stuff?
Who hires Brittany? I'm gonna be so churchy and be like, God
Oh,
hires
come
me.
on. Church it up.
No. So I'm really, really, really just and I say that to be kind of funny, but at the same time I really want to just give honor to the one and only that is true. Like
Mhm.
literally the way that these people find me is
Oh, yeah.
really by the grace of God. Like people would be like, "I remember you from 5 years ago," and I'm like, "Great, I don't remember you, but I'm in rooms and spaces where people know my name, and I don't think that's by coincidence." But yeah, I work for a ton of different agencies, a ton of different clients and companies, and just get a chance to glean and to work with fun people. I haven't had a chance to work with you yet, but
Oh, I'm not going
hoping
to
that.
rule that out for some time in the future. You'd think that our small little world, sometime our paths will
Yeah.
finally cross.
I'm waiting, Steven. I'm waiting.
So, as a producer in those environments,
Mhm.
is it the video side of things? Is it other elements? What is it you're doing? Say one of my listeners has been to a big sales conference in a ballroom or something
Mhm.
similar to that where you've had a hand in it. What kind
Yeah.
of things would you say, oh, yeah, I helped with that? I worked on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So I'll put it in the most concise way for people when I like to explain it. I am kind of the maestro, essentially, when it comes to conducting an orchestra. So I'm the overall liaison when it comes to logistics and details. So when you're seeing everything kind of pull together from lights and videos and screens and graphics and people walking on the stage magically when they're supposed to and
Hmm.
off of it, and you're watching the Grammys or any of that, and there's different camera shots. I'm integral into all those pieces and making sure that all of the people have the right information so that we can like tell a wonderful story or have a wonderful experience.
Yeah. Well, and for those of my listeners who may have never been behind the curtain in one of those
It's fun.
situations, it is incredibly fun, but I think there's an adrenaline level that people like you and I are wired for, that
Yeah.
it is controlled chaos. That even on an event when it seems like everything is ready, everything is put together, some
Mhm.
little thing will happen just before the lights go up, that you're putting out fires or you're chasing somebody down or there's something got unplugged. It's really amazing behind the curtain in one of these things, and there's just miles of cable and it's low lit and there's people buzzing around, and yet somehow the lights go up and, like you said,
Yeah,
first presenter walks out on stage and it just looks magical for everybody
it
sitting in
does.
the house. Keeping all those things in line, the craziness, how are you wired to work in those environments?
How am I wired? Uh, it's taken a while, but I am the calm person on site. I
And
get a
that's
lot of
so
people.
needed.
It is. It's really, really crazy behind the scenes, you guys. I think it's a level of detail and a level of skill to see like the way that these people work, and we're so honed in and like, you know, I think a lot of people think that we work together all the time, and there's so many times like literally we don't meet until day one, and by like day four or day five, we're all
Mm,
family. And to bring all those pieces together for people that have never seen or worked with each other, it's
yep.
just really an art form, really. But I'm the calm person. Like I have foresight, thankfully, and I'm able to see things before they happen. So, like you mentioned, things happening like before they go live, I can see it. I'm like, oh, that's not going to be good. Like I'm always the person that's just looking around, and I'm like, hey, did you guys think about this? And they're like, no. And I'm like, that's probably going to happen.
Yep.
And it sometimes happens. But yeah, I'm very calm, collected, very organized. Try to have all my paperwork in place. And yeah, I've had to learn that. I get a little bit of, anxious from time to time when, people throw little last minute balls and
Hmm.
you know,
And they
you're,
do.
you're, you're, your VO artist, you gotta record a new voice of God, essentially,
Hmm.
for those people that don't know, at the 11th hour because it's the day before and your East Coast people have gone to sleep and you're on
Yes.
the West Coast. It's so much fun, so much fun.
Well, you said that you're a storyteller. I'm curious, in these environments, do you consider yourself still telling stories even when stuff is happening live and in real time?
Yeah, I do because I'm looking at everything holistically. So
Yeah.
it's like when you're bringing in, you're not just looking at the lights. You're not just looking at the presenters. You're like, is this cohesive? Does this make
Yes.
sense? Oh, does it make sense for them to come from stage left? Let's do stage right. Like how they go in and out. So it's a story. It's a symphony. It's a like crescendos. And I'm getting all super technical today, but
Oh yeah, but I'm loving all the words that you're dropping there
I'm
because
loving
see,
the
you're
words.
proving that you're a storyteller. And again, for my listeners who have maybe sat in one of these environments, has been to the big sales conference that their company is holding. Every single one of those details per segment, per session is a line item on some kind of a run sheet, on
Mhm.
some kind of a run sheet somewhere. You're one of those people who's making sure that everything goes well in those
Mhm.
situations. Do you view your role as creative or administrative, or is it some hybrid of the two?
I'm gonna say I'm very administrative.
Okay.
I have systems and templates and processes. I can't say I'm super creative, but I think I'm starting to glean a little bit of that and understanding. But I think you need a healthy dose of both of them. So I'm not like a creative person where I could just think out of left field and be like this, but I
Mm,
know, yeah, I just think that there's a healthy balance of two, but I think that there's not enough administrative, which is where I come in. There's a lot of creative people behind the drape, but then they're like, I'm just looking at this. And I'm like, yeah, but did you think about what Steven's doing also? Like, have you guys talked to each other?
yeah. And that's so I think that's one of the pieces that so many of us that have done it for a while do without thinking. You just learn those rhythms, and even times when you're literally stepping over somebody or you bump into somebody, there's physical issues as well as technical issues, and you just learn to roll with them because when it's showtime, it's game on. And there's no stopping. You don't tell the audience, "Hold on, we got to plug something back in." You're always dealing with something or somebody. With that, you mentioned something before about even just how you get your jobs. How important are the relationships in your world? The people that you meet and the good connections that you make in those situations.
Yeah, relationships are like, I think I think that that's the key point for me. I think when you're on site for so many hours and so many days and you're from city to city, I think really at the end of the day, it's the relationships you're making with people. And so I'm always conscious to say hello to people just to see. And I mean, this doesn't even have to be crew. This can be hotel staff. This can be like security. Like I'm there to bring light and light in the darkness in our industry sometimes, but literally just being aware of people. I mean, this isn't just a job for me. This is like also just being in service. And I literally outside of this job, like I would just be serving people and I get a chance to do that. But yeah, I mean, relationships are key. I mean, with the people that I work with my clients that I work hand in hand. And I think a lot of people see that in me. And so they're like, oh, yeah, we would, you know, we like Brittany, we like her personality, we like that we can give her something, and it's not just like I don't know, some people, I'm gonna say the word crunchy. Sometimes people can be crunchy.
And see, you don't even have
Um,
to explain it. I knew exactly what you meant.
yeah, some people can be crunchy, and yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all people. We're all in the same boat. We're all trying to get the work done.
Yeah. Well, and you actually picked a good spot right there because maybe somebody's listening to this right now going, wait a second, I thought this was a Christian podcast. Uh, You're in a world where there aren't a lot of believers. It's just kind of a general rule I have always found that we're a little bit more of an exception than a rule in those worlds. What does it mean to you to be somebody who follows Jesus in places where there may not be a lot of others who follow Jesus, but you're still there, you're still working in excellence and doing what is required of you, but what does your presence mean to you in those situations?
Yeah, it is very, very difficult because it's hard when you're the only light. Like if you're in a really, really like dark warehouse, you guys, and then if you're like the only light, it's so
Mm,
hard to just shine bright. And then even on like, there's been days I've been on site and I have been just tired, and someone will then approach me and be like, "Why aren't you smiling today?" And what that has told me is like, "Oh, okay, like they saw the light that was in me." But it makes
They
it
saw
just
it
really
yesterday.
challenging. Yeah, right. And I'm like, dang, I like totally forgot to smile today, but because I'm just a little worn down, and it's a grave responsibility essentially, but um focusing on that presence. And I think I had to get clear with God this year of like, okay, God, like I'm going into this season and it's not about how many shows, but how many souls. And going into like, okay, how many people can I present your word to? Because like you said, a lot of people don't believe in God, or that's not something to talk about. And I'm trying to be very conscious of bringing it up. Like,
Mm,
hey, I believe I'm a faith believer, but there was some times where I've been kind of timid, where I say my grace at home, but on show,
mm,
you know how it gets. You do a little click, like your eyes shut for
yeah.
30, 2 seconds, and then you're like, okay, God.
Thank you, Jesus.
Yes, and nobody knows that you're a believer because you're out here just walking in a dark world. So it's hard to kind
Hmm.
of share your faith sometimes.
Well, and something else you mentioned there, because I know that that's something that I deal with and fight. I'll just say it. Our hours, that's a fun thing to say. Our hours
Uh-huh.
are brutal when
Hmm.
we're on a show, in a show. From the time you start loading in to the time that last thing is packed in out of the building, we work incredibly long hours. It's incredibly taxing mentally, physically, and I would even say spiritually. And so when you're 3-4 days into a 5-day show and you're just worn out, it's hard. And I don't have any magic pill other than just trying to, it seems like you're almost having to remind yourself by the moment that don't be short, don't snap somebody's head off. That's not a really good way to present yourself or your savior. Do you have any routines or something that you have to kind of check yourself in those situations when you're just worn out and there's still more hours left to go?
Yeah. So I start every morning, and this has just become a habit. This is before I get to a show site. It's just doing devotion in the morning, and
Mm,
my devotion time is very early, like I tell everyone. But that's very intentional because I don't want to rush God. I try to keep that same cadence on site, no matter how long we wake or how long we work. I'm sorry.
mm,
So 13, 14 hours. I'm still up at 4 a.m. or something, making that time with God, because at the end, it's really God taking over the rest of my day. I can choose to sleep in, but even in my own strength, I'm probably going to fall short.
mm.
And I think just 2 shows ago, I realized that, and I was like, okay, God, like you need to show up today. I want this to be easy, easy yoke, right? I don't want the burden to be heavy. Like that's your word. And so I think when I was able to do it in that show, it was easy. Like I was literally living my best life on show. No one bothered me. No one was asking me. And they were like, I was like, you guys aren't going to check on me. They're like, oh no, we're just so confident in you. And I'm so sorry that we didn't get a chance to check on you. And I was like, I'm okay.
It's
I am okay. And then there was days that they didn't even need me, so I wasn't there as much. And I was like, oh, this is what it is to be easy on site. Now, not every show is like that, but that's what I'm choosing for in the season of like, okay, God, I'm coming to you first. All the craziness, all of the last minute decisions, like correct that. Let it be what it
Mm,
is. Let there not be any mistakes. Like you're a God of, you can answer any prayer. So I'm like, I'm your child. Make this show easy.
yeah,
I don't need to like think of 5 backup plans, which I always do, but
right.
still, like, just make it happen.
Yeah, well, and isn't it interesting too in some of these well, no, I think it's pretty much common that it's all these environments that your ultimate compliment is when things go well.
Yeah.
It's not a big trophy. It's not a big pat on the back or anything. Sometimes your thanks is literally silence, but you gauge for that, and it's sometimes the greatest thing is when you can get together with the crew at the end of a night or end of a show, and you just high five everybody and say that was cool. Maybe I'll see you again. There's not a lot of celebration in some of those things, and you just want to get through it.
I would say that's fair for normal people. I again try to be super intentional with my crew or my inner circle of people that I work with, and I'm praising them the whole time. Like
Mm,
before we start show, before we like are at the top of the show, I say, you know what, you guys, thank you so much for having a wonderful show. You guys are going to kill it. It's amazing. Thank you in advance. you guys are going to do great. And then I count us in and we're having a show. That's how I operate in my zone of genius. And then, of course, I thank them after. But, the after is like people are like, let's roll out.
Yep.
No one's on comms. No
Everybody's
one's doing
half asleep.
Everyone's half asleep. But I think that, giving that praise in advance essentially is like letting people know, like, we worked really hard to get to this point, and whatever we did is to the best of our ability. Mistakes are going to happen.
Yeah.
Do your very best to kind of, come back with the, backup plan the best way you can. But we're humans at the end of the day. We are not robots.
Yep.
We are not robots.
Well, and because I haven't had the opportunity to work with you yet, just you telling me that's not normal.
Oh, okay.
There is an element, and I'm sure you've seen it. Those of us who've done this, and especially the longer that you do it, you just see it in people's eyes. There is we've seen it all. We've done it all. Oh, they're adding some kind of pyrotechnics on this one. Yeah, we've done that before. Oh, a confetti cannon. How original. We have to live in a bit of a hype space that we may or may not have any real buy-in on. So just knowing that you've got such a voice of positivity, that's needed in that world, because I think a lot of us, I'll say us, will sleepwalk through the grandest of shows with all the lights and lasers and subwoofers and things. Yeah, it's like, okay, yep, I've done it. When's meal break? Because I'm starving. How do you deal with that, knowing that, where am I going with this question? We have to live in a little bit of a hype world. Mm-hmm. Are you hyping yourself up, or is that something that's coming natural for you?
Hyping myself personally, or hyping the people that are on my team?
Both. I mean, when you consider that, you know that you've got a lot of people, you've got a lot of elements, and there's a great expectation on all of you. There's a delivery to be made, and that client wants a stellar show. Do you have to bring it up in yourself, or do you find that you're drawing from something that God has really given you to draw from?
So for me, it's kind of the inverse. So I will pour out until I have no more. So that's natural for me. Natural for me checking on people to say, hey, I know that you're not stepping away. Do you want me to grab you a plate for lunch? Like, do you want me to save you? Like, that's just innate to me. It's the hyping myself up. That is having to be intentional recently, of like having God talks or having faith talks with myself of like, okay, God has put me in this space. God has ordained this. God is like, I'm already here, and he's guiding my steps. And so I have to hype myself up, I guess, more than I have to hype up the other people, because I, sometimes feel disqualified or feel like I'm not qualified for the position. I'm like, I don't know why they are trusting me to do this show. Like I think we've shared this before. I think someone asked me to do, I made the silly mistake of thinking, because in our world, just because someone asks you to do something doesn't mean that like that's the scope and the role that's part of it, or at least in my world of things. Like the terminology gets a little loose, and I'm like, but what do you mean by producer? And what do you mean by like show caller, stage manager, like. And I think someone called on me for one thing, and I was like, yeah, sure. And then like 2 weeks before, like a week before we were supposed to go on site to fly, I was like, I had this funny idea that you were asking me to do something I've never done before. Like, just wanted to make sure. And she was like, yeah, we were asking you to do the opposite. And I was like, I've never done this before. And she was like, yeah, but we fully trust you. And I'm like, I don't know why. I've never called a show before, and you're asking me to call a show. And I thought you wanted me to be you wanted me to be like assistant stage manager. Totally two different things, like logistics, and then calling the show as the maestro and telling people like when they hit their cues. So yeah, I mean, definitely a thing.
But wouldn't you say, I'm going to go ahead and agree that you would agree with me here. So many of us do what we do almost by osmosis. You've learned just by being in the room, just by being behind the curtain, just by sitting at front of house long enough. You knew that if something happened to the person you were sitting next to out of the blue, you could probably step in just because you've seen it enough. You've been an erstwhile apprentice to so many people just because you've seen what they do. You've heard the jargon enough to where it's like, well, okay, I've never done that, but somebody's got to do this right now.
But I'm a like perfect poly, or at least I try to be. So that is intimidating for me because I could hear you. I'm a doer. So I'm like, if I've never touched it before, it makes me super nervous to do it. If I've never gotten a chance to break it, like not during an actual show. So yeah, I've heard people on comms and stuff, or like our headset talk, but you're not really paying attention. Like you only listen for your cues.
It's just
so I'm
noise.
Not like, right. I'm like, oh, okay, that's my cue. I'm not thinking about audio. I'm not thinking about camera, playback pro, none of that. I'm just like, oh, okay, all about me. And then someone's like, oh no, I need you to sit in the driver's seat and to tell everyone else. And I'm like, I wasn't paying attention to anyone, but myself, being the selfish human that I am.
Yeah, but don't you find that even in those moments when you're given an opportunity, God's grace just covers you and you're like,
it's all about
right,
the grace.
Stretch me, God, because without you, I'm going to fall on my face here.
It is all about the grace. I literally think like from grace to grace and glory to glory, that is the only way that I survive some days. Because I'm like, I don't understand. I don't know why you keep picking me. And it actually is like a reminder of God. Like, I don't know why you keep picking me. And God's like, because I chose you.
Well, even do you feel that like between gigs when you're maybe wondering, it's like, wow, it seems like there's a little bit of a dry spell. And I'm not even going to attempt to talk about what the 2 years of COVID must have been like for you. But as a freelancer, I know what those empty boxes on a calendar, what they look like, what they mean long term. But does that cause you to trust all the more? So
you're coming from my life. This is a yearly battle, or it's not a yearly. It's a daily battle. It is a daily battle. And I've done this for, I've been freelancing for I think 10 years now. And so every day around this time or when it dries up, I'm like, okay, God, what are we going to do? And I get in this cycle where I think I can psych myself up and like reach out to people. And that's disobedient because God's like, I've got you. I'm going to bring in the positions that I need for you. And so anytime I try to go outside the will of God and reach out to people and be like, hey, Steven, so what's going on? Do you need a producer for your next show? Like, how's the kids? Yeah. How's the kids? Just asking. A long time no speak. And God's like, that's not what I wanted you to do. And then it'll be me minding my business like today. And I get a text message and say, hey, when are you available for this, and this? And I'm like, I wasn't even thinking about you. And so it's that resting in God of knowing that he's going to provide. But I've started to have to learn discernment because I get a lot of roles and positions and inquiries, and I'm very grateful for them. But it's like not all of them are God given, essentially, or what God wants me to do. So that's become a little bit challenging for me. Now that I can rest in the confidence, I'll get 5 or 6 people, and I'm like, am I supposed to take all of these guys?
Right.
I'm like, ooh, this one looks like, more money, less, work. And God's like, I need you to come back to me and seek my face daily, even on the 5 that I gave you.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned zone of genius, and that's a term that I feel like I just kind of wrapped my head around last year. And I'm still gaining understanding of it because I realize on the surface it can sound a little haughty to refer to yourself as any kind of a genius. But I think when you really do wrap your head and heart around what that means, it truly means that you're operating how God wired you to be. So in that light, do you love what you do?
Oh, why do you have to ask this question? Okay. I'm trying to give you a really nice answer that's like, there's parts I love about it and there's parts that I don't. That's an honest statement for, I think, everyone. I think I'm still in a place of figuring out my zone of genius. There's things I do really well that are a skill, and then there's things that are talent, and then there's things that God has given me. And so it's understanding all those components of saying, great, you can write really well, or you can do administrative stuff really, really well, but there's a talent that God has given you, and that's what you need to be using more than kind of, being able to do something else well. So I think that's why I struggle to answer the question. Do I like what I do? Yes. Is it always in purpose? I'm not sure yet. That's where I'm at in my season of like,
Oh, sure.
God.
Well, the funny thing about that is that I just got off the phone with my tax guy about an hour ago, and he was asking me about some freelance income from last year. And he said, "You didn't have any the year before." And I said, "I'm really trying to cut back on that stuff."
Mhm.
And very much in line with what you were just saying. Are there things about that I absolutely love? Yes. There are people in that world that I miss. I know I could pick up my phone and call them, and I probably should, but there's just something different about getting on set with somebody, getting somewhere, and you bump into an old friend that you haven't worked with for a while, and those relationships are so amazing. But the hours, the grind, the tediousness of a loadout. And I realize for my listeners, we've probably thrown a lot of terms around here that may go over your head, but the loadout is when everything comes down, everything gets packed up again, and that sometimes is at the end of an already very long day, and you're just trying to get through it. And there's times where you're thinking, why did I take this gig? when your feet are just screaming and you just can't wait to get home. I appreciate you being honest about that, because I don't think, this month I'm talking to people in the making business, but I think that applies to anybody. There's parts of your job, parts of your career that you absolutely love, but nobody likes filling out the expense report at the end of it or whatever, quickly comes to mind for people. But
like, also on that topic, just wanted to share this with like people with advice. Like, there's certain things, like I'd mentioned, like I guess, and I would say I'm a Jane of many trades, but to know your zone of genius is to also know when to say no, because although you might excel in that space, you're like exuberating extra energy that you don't need to do. And so it's like, just pick one lane and stay in your lane, essentially. Don't try to do all the things. And that's very hard for me because I'm a doer of all things. But it's very, there's a control thing there too. And it's like, okay, just settle down, do the one thing well, and be okay with not being like, oh, but I can also do this, and I can do this, and I can do this. And it's like, that's not what God called you to do.
Yeah. I want to switch gears just because I love your podcast. And I know that we podcasters seem to love always talking about our podcasts. I was doing an outro for another episode recently, and I thought, well, if I had a nickel for every time I say podcast in this podcast, I'd have a lot of nickels. But I love your podcast. That's how Brittany and I connected. We met through a podcasting group on Facebook, and I'm so appreciative for things like that allow for this kind of networking. And it's been cool because I feel like we have established a friendship that we can check on each other, we can text each other, and that you would have the grace to even just do my show like this, and how much I appreciate it. But is your podcast an extension of what you do, or is it almost more like here's something that I can do how I want in another zone of genius, where it's like God's gifted you. I love the way you can relate your stories, and I love the way you relate to your guests. How did that thing come to life?
So I am the host of the Big Bold Faith podcast, and that really came out of a season. It was 2020 for most of us, and I just heard God was like, hey, I want you to start a podcast. And for me, that was really scary because as I'm presenting, you guys must think I'm an extrovert and I love being in front of people. But Stephen, my man, knows over here, I'm very introverted. And so after this episode and today, I will probably go take a nap because there's been a lot of people I've engaged with
zapping
today.
Your energy.
It's zapping my energy. But I love the work that I'm able to do. I think at first I was very nervous. I didn't know what it was supposed to sound like. And us in the production world of things, like it had to be perfect. It like had to sound, it had to feel a certain way. It's like if you're a movie maker and you decide to have your own independent film, like you got to take some of the skills that you gleaned and with Sony and all the other people and just bring it over. But it's been nice to see it evolve the way that God has given me instruction. And I did go through a couple of different people and that was nervous too, because I was like, God, I don't have time for this. Like, you've given me a full-time job to be a producer, but you want me to also do this completely different thing that you're asking me to do. I don't have the time. And God's like, okay, well, I'm going to give you an Aaron or a her And I went through a couple of errands in hers, and I finally landed on really one that I love right now. And I'm like, and I've told him, I'm like, I know that you're going to leave me maybe in a season, and I'm okay with that, but I don't want to really, I don't want to let you go, essentially. So
Yeah. Well, and that
yeah.
even you caused me to think there. To circle back on a thought that we just had with regard to doing what you should and pulling back on where you shouldn't. Something I feel like I've learned a lot about here in more recent years is ability versus capacity. It's like, can I do that? Yes. But should I do it? And there's always so many different factors, especially when you're looking at a calendar and wondering, okay, what do I make time for? And even like what you were just saying, that you're going to need some time to recharge, that you don't want to just line everything up, bang, 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 to where you've completely worn yourself out. How do you keep yourself honest and healthy, for that matter, in those situations when could you book your calendar like crazy? Yes. But should you? Probably not.
Yeah. And I'm in a season of or unlearning what I would do, because I am, like I mentioned, I'm very administrative. I'm very to the letter, to the T. So I would have back to back to backs, and learning. There's a term I just learned, like basically stay within your margins, stay within the things that you can do. And so you might not be able to get everything done on your checklist today, but that's fine. Just make room and space for it the next day, or think of the things that you can get done very easily. And then you can also just kind of take a step back and look at it as, is today going to be an efficient day, or is it going to be an effective day? And just kind of giving yourself grace with that, I think, is where I am as far as like learning how to not be back to back, looking at schedules. Also with the podcast. The podcast takes time. You know this, like looking at topics. I'm very, very trying to be intentional with just hearing from God. So I have probably 10 or 15 cool episode ideas that are just kind of sitting in my bank. Have I recorded them? No, because I felt like God gave me titles, but hasn't given me content yet.
Yeah.
And so throughout the week, like next week, I'm like, I don't have content yet. But why I don't have content? Because I've booked my schedule in a bunch of other areas. And I frankly talk about this all the time. Being in a space of making space for God so that he can tell you specifically. I don't want to ever just pretend like, oh, I have a new revelation from God. I'm like, no, God, like I really need to know that, because I do not want to be standing in front of you. And he's like, so why would you say that? And I'm like, the episode was coming out on Wednesday and I just didn't know, God. So, yeah.
Well, the word that I feel like circling back on as we're wrapping up is that so much of your world happens in obscurity. Anybody at an event who's attending, and maybe even folks that are on the same show that you're not necessarily working with directly, you do what you do quietly and proficiently. What does it mean to you then to operate in excellence, to give your very best when so much of it, I mean, yes, the effect of it is seen, but your work, your effort, sometimes weeks of preparation leading up to an event, that's between you and God. What does it mean to operate there for you?
Yeah, that's super key to, I would even say like a value of like integrity and excellence and doing things to the letter and to the T, and that I'm not, billing extra hours that I'm not really doing, like that that's a thing. That's not me, but
which is also good to know.
It is. Well, I mean, that's your building blocks, right? So I don't want to portray to be one person and not be able to carry that into my work. Similarly to like talking about our faith. If I try to like quiet that passion that I have, I'm quieting a part of myself and the fullness that God has given me. So if I try to be, only and about integrity at home, but not in person, it's like, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. You're actually putting more energy of not being your full authentic self that God has called you to do. So, and I'm okay working in the background. I like to say I'm a shoe op girl. I'm good with being in the back, but I do like to please people, but it doesn't have to be like the direct client. It just has to be the indirect client. So I'm like, sometimes I need a little like, you did a really good job. Thank you. And I kind of seek that. But yeah, I'm okay with being in the back in black.
Yes, which is key. We're hard to see, but at the same time, very easy to identify who. When you see that squad of 7 or 8 people all wearing various shades of black, you know what they're off to do. Brittany, I always love to leave a little space at the end of my interviews, my conversations, just to say, was there an avenue of this that you thought we would get to and we didn't, or something that came to mind in the middle of any of this to where I always want to have some margin for my guests to say, yeah, something else came to mind and here's what it is.
Yeah. I love this conversation. I think it's such an important conversation, and us just getting back into being open about who you are, and whatever you are, if you're whatever vein of that you're a maker, that you do work, that you also be able to share your light along the way. I think that's helped me along the way. And I think people are naturally attracted to me, and not to be boastful or anything, but because they see my light. But my light doesn't come from me. My light comes with my relationship with God. So when people are like, oh my goodness, you're so calm, I said, no, that's not me. That's God and me today. You're lucky I woke up at 4:00 this morning because, ma'am, sir, I had some words for you yesterday, but today we are new creation in Christ. But yeah, I think it's so important, for anyone that's struggling, that's like, I don't think I can do this. I don't know about this job. I'm not sure how to walk with God in this workspace. I think it just has to start with that relationship, and seek discernment and seek His face.
I love her heart. I love her perspective. And I love that she will regularly just drop me a text or an email to ask how she can pray for me. She is the real deal. Would you please take a moment today and pray for Brittany and others like her? I truly believe that she is a missionary in her work. Pray that they would all be people of peace, salt, and light in an area that needs all of it. Please check out Brittany's podcast, Big Bold Faith. I've got a link for that in the show notes. I am always so encouraged by her show. Thank you so much for listening today, and I will catch you here next time in the Nook.
The Nook Podcast is a production of Sozo Digital Media.